Hey everybody, welcome to the latest edition of Friends Friday here at PlexTrac. We're really excited about today's show. You know me, I'm Dan DeCloss, founder and CTO of PlexTrac. Today we have on our cast Phil Wylie. We're really excited about having him on. We're going to be talking about building and maturing an offensive security program, something that's near and dear to both of our hearts. But for those of you that haven't met Phil, I'd love for Phil, you go ahead and introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background, and that'll just help us dive into this topic because I'm excited to talk about it. I'm sure we could spend a lot of time on it, but introduce yourself and then let's dive in.
Okay, sure. I'm Phillip Wylie. I've been working in cybersecurity 20 years as of January, on the offensive side for 12 years. I'm also a former adjunct instructor. I used to teach pen testing and web app pen testing at Dallas College and continue to teach workshops at conferences. And also I'm the concept creator and co-author of the Pen Tester Blueprint, which is a book on starting a career in penetration testing. And I'm also a podcaster. I host the Phillip Wylie Show and formerly the Hacker Factory podcast.
Great, awesome. Well, and you recently started a new role, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So is it okay to share that, or like?
Sure. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I shared on LinkedIn already, but I don't officially start until 29th of April, but I am starting work with Horizon 3 AI. They have a automated pen testing tool, which is something kind of important. And as we dive into our talk, we'll kind of discuss some of the importance of the evolution of pen testing, because, once upon a time, we didn't have vulnerability scanners. This is before I got into pen testing. We didn't have Metasploit, but those things that help scale teams. And there's a need for more of that, even just like using tools like PlexTrac before people were manually writing reports. So all this automation and different specialized applications makes a pen tester's job more easy, as well as helps them scale.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I think that flows into, like, there's a couple things that are always on the top of people's minds, right? And so I think, kind of what we'll want to chat through today, just like, what does it take to build a team? And then, like, for individuals, like, I think you brought up a good point, like I get questions a lot. I'm sure you get it a lot too. What does it take to get into pen testing, specifically in offensive security? I think a lot of security professionals, just kind of in general, like, have been asked a lot about how they get into security, but even, pen testing is a much more specialized skill. And then, and then how do we kind of like help these teams grow and scale, because it is a pretty niche skill set. But I guess maybe let's start with, like, what is your advice to someone actually trying to get into pen testing, and then how does that foray into building a pen test team?
Well, I'd say one of the things is not to skip the basics, not skip the fundamentals, because a lot of cases, and it's kind of understandable, pen testing is a very interesting field, and a lot of times people just want to jump into learning the hacking piece, but it makes it a lot easier if you understand, the different IT fundamentals. Because for me, before I even got into security, I spent 6 years as a sysadmin, which was the most valuable experience I had going into being a pen tester. So you really have to understand the technology to be able to defend it and be able to break into it. The more you understand it, the easier it's going to be. Because if you get a shell or command line to a Windows box and you don't know the command line, you're going to be doing a lot of Googling and researching. So you really need to know those operating systems at a sysadmin level. Doesn't mean you have to spend 6 years as a sysadmin. There's some people out there, that's what they'll recommend, that you have to start out on help desk. You have to start out desktop support or sysadmin, work all these other roles. You don't. You just need the education of that. So you don't actually have to spend all that time in those areas. You just need to learn. And good options too for learning those basics is Professor Messer has some free videos on YouTube on A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus. You get through those, it'll give you a good base understanding before you start on to trying to learn the hacking piece.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that, while people really want to know how to get into security and into pen testing specifically, having those foundational skills and technology, really play a big role, right? Like you mentioned, like, I think some of the best net pen testers that I've met, were in that sysadmin role, or, in some kind of had prior lives, and so they really understood how the networks worked and the applications that run the networks. Also, my background is much more in web app security, and I was a web app pen tester primarily, and I found that some of the sharpest web app pen testers, and it's not always the case, but some of the sharpest ones were former software engineers, former
Mhm.
developers. They understood kind of how libraries came together and how the code would kind of be pieced, and it's always that kind of that big puzzle, right? Of like, how do I break into this network, or how do I find this odd vulnerability in this web app? And so having some of that baseline background in technologies, particularly like software engineering, IT, and networking, system administration plays a big factor. And I'm glad you called out those resources, because it's also not one of those things where you have to go to college, or say there's always that
Mhm.
big debate, but it's more, and this is what I always tout, is that having the knowledge and the skill set is the most important thing. How you get there, and whether that's through a formal training program or for a degree. Of course, like probably back when we were getting started with it, there wasn't a lot of degrees back then, but
Yeah.
I was very fortunate, but like a lot of folks, they just kind of pick it up along the way. So I think that's a really good thing to remember for everyone. And like, you have to kind of just be researching on your own, right? I mean,
Mhm.
so doing a lot of stuff. So yeah, so I think that's a good foundation. So then, like, you've built security, or you've built pen test teams, and then been a part of consulting firms, as well as kind of worked with larger organizations. Like, what's your advice, and how have you gone about like building a pen test team, and what are some of the key things that you look for in your team members as well?
And one of the things you're going to need too, because you're building out a team and it depends on the size, is you're going to need some good senior folks that are willing to mentor and help others. I've seen people throughout my career that weren't patient, didn't want to help people. So you really need someone that's almost as good of a leader and mentor as they are a pen tester. So that way you build the team out, you can kind of lean on them to educate the team and bring them up to speed. And one of the things too that you really need to instill in your team is a sense of teamwork. Because I've been on teams before where we're all remote, totally isolated. No one was really helping each other. But when you got that cohesive team, they're sharing that information. Because when you're first getting started out in pen testing, when you're having to go through validate vulnerabilities, there's manual ways of doing it. You just don't take the output from Nessus and say that's vulnerable. You do manual testing techniques. And as pen testers, we're all keeping our little notebooks and notes on how we do that stuff. But if we can have like a centralized repository of notes that we can share with the team, some of those things that we already figured out how to do, they can figure out how to contribute to that library and make things a lot easier instead of everyone wasting time. Research is good because you learn how to research, but why should someone have to research something that's already researched and already documented?
Right. So along those lines, I think like good teamwork. Some of that is personalities, right? So it doesn't always come down to skills per se when you're kind of building a team. Like most people are. It's like some people just may not be a fit for the culture of the team. But so like, once you've kind of established the key players on the team, what are some of the ways that like you've built the program itself? What are some of those key aspects of, like, whether it's like a consulting, engage, like kind of a consulting type firm, or even like advice for like organizations building an internal program? What are some of the key characteristics that you've seen be successful?
Yeah, making sure that, kind of going back to that documentation, make sure you're documenting the processes, that you have a good run book that's easy to duplicate. Because once people come in, we're humans, we make mistakes. So be able to document, have a run book, that checklist, you can go back and make sure you've done those things. And some of those are options too. If I remember correctly, in PlexTrac, that you can actually have those run books there, make sure you got that checklist, because it's so easy to forget things. Make sure you get the processes documented, a good report template, that you are really making sure you're building out a good executive summary. So the folks outside of the technical side of things, like your CISOs and your board, get value out of that report, because you want them to get as much value as you do the tech team, because they're the ones signing the check and making all the approvals. And if you do a good job there, if you're a consultant, they're going to have you back. But in the report, really document the steps. If you exploited something, make sure you're documenting all the steps you got in and not just the screenshot of proof. Ideally, best practices, you want to detail that enough so they could go back and replicate it themselves, or another pen tester is going behind you retesting, that they're able to easily duplicate those steps. And also, I think constantly educating. If someone on your team doesn't have experience with web, you know, get them training on web, and then kind of have them shadow others to learn that. So one of my best jobs in my career was my second consulting job. Is any type of pen testing I wanted to do, they would tell me, go take this training, read this white paper, and you can do the pen test. So being open to let people learn, because one of the reasons people leave companies, if they're bored, not getting to learn more. So make sure you're keeping it interesting for them. And I would say stay ahead of the curve and learn some of the newer technologies that are becoming more prevalent in our industry. Like some of the large learning models and Web3 stuff. Start investigating that, because notoriously you're in a company and all of a sudden someone saw some presentation somewhere. Yeah, we're going to this, type of AI product or whatever. So kind of
Right.
stay in the curve.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And then, I kind of joke that hackers are lazy, right? In a good way. And they're like,
Yeah.
if you have to do something twice, they will find a way to automate it, right? It's like, I don't
Yes.
have to do this again. What have been some of the things that you've seen from a tooling perspective? I mean, you gave a nice plug for PlexTrac. Obviously, we're super biased, but what are some of the other tools in the tool belt that you've seen be successful for teams? And things that maybe people trying to get into it should maybe try to learn if they can.
Yeah, I think there some of the reconnaissance tools out there, like Amass. Jeff Foley created Amass, and that you mentioned people automating stuff. So that's one of the interesting things about the AI and all that automation. People are starting to do more of that because people were trying to automate the easy tasks. So I think trying to, working on automation and that type of thing to help make your job easier, and then you can spend more time on the more interesting things. And that's where people kind of worry about AI. But I think as practitioners, we should be happy with AI because it takes us away from some of those boring tasks. Because
Mhm.
I'm sure you probably experienced this as a pen tester, going back, validating SSL related vulnerabilities can be boring, especially on a big pen test. You've got hundreds of vulnerabilities related to that, and you're going through and validating those things. With AI and some of the automation, you're able to spend more time on the interesting stuff.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I mean, like I use the term let automation take care of the low hanging fruit, right?
Mhm.
Burp Suite was like one of the key tools in my tool belt and it still is, right? Because it'll find a lot of those things, or at least find some of the initial things that, like, oh, this looks juicy. I may go here, right? And then like just like any tooling, then like you said, it allows the testers to focus on the much more difficult problems that take longer to solve. I mean, the joke we always had was, Friday afternoon was when you actually got the most interesting exploits developed because if it was like a week-long engagement, you had all week to really kind of understand the application, understand the inner workings of it. So you kind of would get these aha moments towards the end of the test because you were so familiar with the application. And if you didn't have automation that led you to that, you might miss something. And then that's just, then it's just a gap that doesn't get discovered, right, from the engagement, and
Mhm.
could get discovered by an attacker, right? So um, but okay, no, great insight there. So, what has been your experience? So, like, you built the team, you got kind of the tools in place and the automation in place. Kind of thinking more programmatically. What are some of the key things that you recommend for teams? I'm thinking this could be a consulting engagement where it's more continuous, but like internal teams especially, they're doing this on a continuous basis. What's been your approach, or you've seen be successful for really having a continuous assessment program?
Yeah, as far as continuous assessment and being frequent is important, because back several years ago, PCI DSS only required one pen test per year.
Right.
So having those frequent pen tests, and I think as far as an internal company, sometimes people would do this with consultants, is rotate out the people that are doing the tests, because you bring someone in and you set eyes and maybe they find something and they're more skilled in a certain area than the person before them, but rotating out, those pen testers and really trying to get buy-in from the company as well as the IT teams and the security teams to let everyone know that you're on the same page, that you're trying to help each other. You're not trying to make them look bad. And as far as the pen testers goes, when you're doing these debriefings or report readouts, be respectful when you're documenting the pen test. Make sure you're documenting all the things that they did good.
Right.
That way you're not just coming in on the offensive, making them look bad. So you want to let them know that you're on the same side. And sometimes they understand that better, and they will, you'll get more teamwork on their side. They'll be more willing to help you out and make for a better experience for both sides.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, because obviously we've been around the notion of purple teaming for quite a while, right? And that's one of the things that I truly, I wouldn't say harp on, but it's kind of my mantra around, like, it's important to highlight the things that didn't work from the pen tester's perspective, right? So like it did work from the defender's perspective of like, hey, we blocked this type of attack, or we were alerted to it, or have forensic evidence, because then you can actually track progress over time too, right? I mean, so being able for testers, it is important to say, hey, not only did we find these things, but here were the things that didn't work that we really tested for. And it, kind of, if you're like tracking against like, MITRE ATT&CK, you can kind of say like, hey, you have some gaps in maybe privilege escalation, but you've got some really strong controls in lateral movement or something like that, right? And I think that's an interesting takeaway for teams to really, if you're not, try to emphasize the things that didn't, like from the tester's perspective, didn't work, so that the security controls that were in place that did work. So that way you have this running trend of like, hey, these were over time, this is the amount of stuff that continued to fail for every test that you did. And, and then, maybe a year later, you can actually show a lot of progress. I don't know. And that's just my opinion. I don't know if you got anything there, but
yeah, I really, really like your comments on the purple teaming. I think that's awesome. I'm a big fan of it. And I think people can bring up the postures of their organization so much quicker, because you figure if you're only doing an annual pen test or biannual pen tests, then you've got that amount of time, because, it's a cycle. You do the pen test, you do the remediation, repeat the process. So if you're only pen testing once a year, there's all that time that nothing's going on. But if you can go in, do the purple team exercises, eliminate some of the possibilities from the hands of a threat actor, remove some of the tools that they can use, that goes a long way with improving your security posture.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And then I think that the nice thing about, kind of the world that we live in today, while some of the requirements still may require annual testing, or maybe that's the minimum, I do think that teams are starting to get the notion of the importance of just continuous testing, right? So like keeping those, the scopes of those engagements small, and maybe even very pointed, or hey, the product that we normally test is releasing a new feature. So just getting that into kind of the like getting testing built into the life cycle of deployment and release, which I would say hasn't, like when I first got started, that definitely was not the case, right? Testing was an afterthought, and everything was in production at that time.
Yeah. And then so much of the pen testing being based on compliance and not really done for the true reasons why you should have a pen test done.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like just getting the box checked so the report just ends up on the shelf. And that's true. I mean, I remember distinctly in my consulting days, we'd have repeat customers, testing the same app. And while we tried to mix up who would be testing different apps, you'd kind of come back to it after like 2 years or something. And I definitely remember picking up one of the old reports that a team member of mine had done on a web app that was like 2 years old, right? And I'm like, hey, I'll just test to see if any of those findings still exist. And sure enough, like, one of the session cookies was still valid. This is 2 years late, so 2 years later. So, and it was that same type of finding. So they didn't fix it, and then it was the same session token, right? So it's just like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
like, this is crazy.
Not remediating is scary because I did a test one time at one of the places I consulted. We did a pen test of this company, and so we went in. They had a 90-day retest, so I went in, performed the pen test. They actually remediated the criticals, highs, and mediums. But by the time I came back and retested, one of the low vulnerabilities, someone had figured out how to, not in that environment, but someone had figured out how to exploit that vulnerability. So I went back doing my Nessus scans and stuff. Then it popped up that it's now a critical or a high because someone in that 90 days figured out, or security researcher, threat actor, figured out how to exploit it. And if it hadn't been for me coming back and they would have waited another year, they would have been open a year to possibly being exploited.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that that's a good lead into kind of the last kind of thought I wanted to kind of bounce off of you is like truly kind of being able to show the value that you have and getting buy-in from leadership. I think that's always been the pen testing investment, security investment in general, always is kind of this give and take in terms of budget and time and people. So what would you say, you would give tips to teams as people are building it out to like truly show the value that you're demonstrating over time, and keeping the key stakeholders engaged? What are some tips and tricks there?
So I'd say, keeping good documentation, on reports to make comparisons so you can kind of see how things are improving, keep stats on that as well as educate management and the other teams on pen testing. I mean, come in and maybe even I do a talk that I call offensive security awareness that I've given at conferences. And basically the goal of it was to teach people that are not working on the offensive security side about red teaming and pen testing, and the different assessment types and show the comparisons. So I think really explaining to them and going beyond your typical security awareness is a good way to let them understand and see the value in it. Because I think when people don't realize how critical it is, it's kind of an afterthought. They really don't take it seriously. But whenever you can educate folks on why it needs to be done, whenever certain vulnerabilities come out, they're exploitable, share that same information that you're seeing with the teams to let them know, just let them know how serious it is, because education go a long ways, and also tracking how well the company's doing with the remediation and all that because of
Mhm.
the pen test.
Yeah, and do you have any experience? Obviously, for an internal team, they understand the context of the business and the risk and threat profiles and the stakeholders. But do you have any experience with like consulting firms where, hey, for different customers, you might have to, approach the risk conversation in different ways, right? Kind of tailoring it to what that business truly might care about. I mean, this was just a random thought. I don't know if
Yeah.
you got any advice there or not. So.
Yeah, I've seen that in some organizations, and I actually worked for a company for a while that started out as a consulting company, but they created a cloud-based solution for importing the pen test results and doing risk quantification. They even showed like the cost for any kind of compliance-based fines, the cost to remediate, and all that, and that way kind of showed you what to focus on as far as for prioritization of the remediation. So I think those type of items are good. And I see things going more towards a risk-based approach. And that is something that's the kind of the lingo that the board and the business groups are going to understand. So we come back to them with a risk quantification or risk-based approach, they're going to understand it a lot better than some of the jargon that we would rattle off on about the different vulnerabilities or exploits.
Yeah, yeah, and that prompted, kind of almost in my head, kind of coming full circle to like the team members themselves. As it obviously the technical skill set is super important, right? And being able to have the chops to do the hacking and understand the technology and what you're actually doing. Even from the tool set, I'm always a big believer in understanding what the tool set is doing under the hood, right? In terms of not just being able to hit the button, what we used to call the
Mhm.
script kiddie, or maybe we still do call them script kiddies, but but also the being a really good communicator, right? Being able to
Yes.
effectively communicate the risk, right? Because you have to know your audience, right? Like, speech 101 or communications 101 is like, know the audience. What are they gonna care about? And so you hit it on the head, I think, in terms of the stakeholders. They're gonna speak a different language in terms of business risk, and so being able to accommodate and tailor your communications and your assessments towards that audience is important, right? So, yeah. Well, great. I know. I mean, it goes by so these sessions go by so fast. We could spend probably 3 more hours talking about all this in much more depth. But we just love to be able to kind of bring people on, share their experiences, talk about interesting topics. I know this one we have a lot of stuff we could go into, but I would say I would sum up the key takeaways from like building yourself in terms of knowing the underlying technologies, taking it on yourself to understand and learn those resources, automating as much as possible for your team, and building that continuous kind of assessment mindset and paradigm, and then really staying in the mode of progress over time, and how you're communicating that value to your stakeholders. Those seem to be kind of the big themes that we chatted about, from like building a mature offensive security program. Is there anything else that anything else you want to throw in there, or does that sound like a plan?
That sounds good. I think you covered it.
Yeah. Well, great. So now, why don't you share with us, some of your resources, as we sign off here? Like, I know, how can people find you? Where can they learn about any services and trainings that you're offering? And then, any last parting words?
Sure. Some of the best places, of course, my website, thehackermaker.com, but you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to answer questions. I have folks that are trying to break into security or penetration testing, or just people in general just wanting to understand more about the offensive security space, reaching out to me all the time. I'm also available on X, formerly known as Twitter. You can find me there, and you can also go to my YouTube channel, which is Phillip Wylie. And if you go there, I even have like a whole semester of the lectures I taught at Dallas College on pen testing, so people can take advantage of that and see some recordings of those presentations, as well as my podcast, The Phillip Wylie Show. I have different people from the industry sharing how they got into it, broad range of backgrounds.
Awesome. Well, and thanks so much for all that you do for the community too. I mean, that's always an important aspect of our industry. I think it's unique to our industry that we really have a community that for the most part really tries to share and help each other grow and learn and be successful in our own rights, because I think we all share the same mission at the end of the day. So thanks for all that you do. Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate your time. We know it's valuable, and we look forward to doing this again sometime. And definitely best of luck. We love the folks over at Horizon 3 and love the product Node Zero, so we'll give them a plug as well. But we're excited to have had you on the show. And for all those that haven't tuned in before, feel free to leave comments in the chat, and we will definitely try to reach back out and get those answered. But I'll also plug, like, if there's anybody else that you'd be interested in hearing, or any other topics that you'd like us to kind of flesh out on a Friday, please let us know, and we'll see what we can do. But really appreciate everybody's time today. Phil, thanks again, and we'll definitely be seeing you soon. So that's it for now. Thanks, everybody. Happy Friday.